Before I get started, one thing I wanted to say, usually I believe the whole thing is you guys, there's a 15 minutes Q&A at the end. I would prefer that, if you guys have any questions during the presentation, just go ahead and ask me, because one thing I hate, just talking over here while everybody else is just listening to me. And the other thing is, this one's not going to be a full presentation where oh. So yeah, sorry about that. So the thing is, since we are talking about multiple tools, it's not going to be one big presentation about one one item. It's going to be about several different, utility applications. So I'd rather that you guys, if you have any questions while I'm talking about one specific utility or a tool, just raise your hand, ask me the questions, and I'll answer that, and we'll move on, because there's going to be 20, 30 apps that I'll be talking about. So yeah, with that said, my name's Fahim Farooq, as the slide says, and I work for Rooksoft, and Rooksoft, to tell you a little bit about it, we started in Sri Lanka, and then we shifted to New Zealand, and then we've ended up in Singapore, and we are based out of Singapore at the moment. We've done applications for a lot of clients, in New Zealand, in Singapore, in Dubai, in Germany, UK, USA, etc. But our main clients have been Huffington Post and AOL, and Now This News, which is a startup which is doing video news feeds. At the moment, Rooksoft does work for Salon.com. Rooksoft does their mobile applications for Salon.com, both their iOS and Android apps. And that's about it. About me, I've been a developer for about 20 years. I've worked with quite a few of the languages which have come up during that time period. So it's a long time in computer terms. So I've developed about 60 mobile apps, and I've been doing mobile app development for about 5 years, probably around the time the App Store took off. So, the talk is based on my experiences during that time period. I also am a Final Pass editor for RayVendelich.com, where, some of you might know Ray or know of his site. Okay, and, my new book is coming out in a couple of weeks. That's about iOS development as well. But to get back to the subject at hand, what I'd first like to find out is, what do you guys develop? How many of you do mobile apps or web apps? Okay. How many do desktop apps? iOS and Android? Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get a feel as to what kind of tools would work, because basically, once we get to it, there's a whole bunch of tools that you can talk about. So this is just to get a feel as to what you'd like to talk about. Okay, now the important question. Who likes Batman? Okay. Well, when I say Batman, I don't mean this guy. I mean this guy. Okay. Now the thing is, one of the things I really liked about Batman were these sound effects. They do this, they portray sound in words, and I really love this, how they use these effects in the Batman comics. So we'll be using it a lot over the, as transitions. So if you guys feel like, sounding out the thing while we go along saying kapow or whatever, feel free. But, now the other thing I really liked about Batman was Batman's utility belt. Now, I don't know whether Batman does this these days, but, in the early comics, he had this utility belt which had almost anything you wanted. He might have shark repellent, or he might have a tiny radio, or a batarang, or a rope. Whatever he needed, he pulls out of his utility belt. Now this is what I think a developer should be like as well. A developer should have a utility belt which is packed full of tools that he can pull out at any point when they need it. And so this talk is about different kinds of tools that you can add to your utility belt and be Batman or a developer. So, okay, the first effect. Okay, now as a developer, the thing that you probably work with most is code. Now, like when you work with code, you need something to do code reference. Like you want to look up API references. You want to see how that command works, that kind of thing. Now, Dash is a brilliant tool for this. It's stopped again.
Continue.
Yeah, sorry.
I'll fix it.
Yeah, so Dash is a brilliant tool for this because it has over
Go ahead.
it has over 80 doc sets which are available offline. So you can download these docs for most of the well-known programming languages like PHP, Perl, whatever you think about. Dash usually has the doc set, and the doc sets are kept updated automatically, so you don't have to say, like, let's say a new version of Ruby comes out, you don't have to go look for the new doc set. It's automatically downloaded.
Next one.
Yeah, sorry, previous one. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you're fine.
Got something shadow. Oops.
Yeah. So the thing is, unfortunately, Dash is OS X only. So if you're on Windows, you're kind of out of luck. But but it's free. Now the thing is, the main app is free. But it after about 2 weeks, I think it starts doing this weird thing where it says Dash's evil twin comes up and starts nagging you for money. That's not Dash's evil twin, by the way. So,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm gonna try to solve this. Sorry.
Okay,
about that.
okay. I think, we are going to just look at this screen for a bit. So anyway, I'll continue on about Dash till we get these technical issues resolved. Now Dash also acts as a snippet manager where you can keep snippets of code, and when you fairly often used snippets of code can be just kept in Dash, and you can bring it up when you need it. Dash also basically that's about it. If you want the once Dash, sorry, I was talking about the feature where it starts nagging you. Once it starts nagging you, if you want to go pro, you can. It's $20, but most of the time they are running promotions, so you can probably get it for like $10. And these are like some of the doc sets that Dash supports.
Works out? Okay,
You're fine? Okay. So let's move on with a bang, I guess. If we don't. Yeah, there we go. Okay. And now PNG Express is a Photoshop plugin. It works on both Windows and OS X. And it will work with Photoshop CS5 onwards, I believe. Now this plugin is brilliant, at least for me. If you're working with graphics, if you do if you get designs from a designer where he or she has given you the designs on layers, this lets you extract the images from each layer individually. You just pass the Photoshop file to PNG Express, which is a plugin in Photoshop itself, and you tell it to extract the images. It'll just extract everything and save it as individual files. Not just that, it has other features where you can get information about all the images on each layer. For instance, you can get Photoshop to extract information about each layer and put it onto another Photoshop image, where you can get the width and the height of each image, the padding between the images. Some of that information is not in this one, but you can basically, because it extracts everything as individual Photoshop images, so I can't put everything into one image, but this hopefully gives you some idea as to what it does. It can save images in different formats. You can tag each layer with the type of image you want saved. Like, you can say PNG and it will save as a PNG. You can say JPEG, it will save as a JPEG file. And you if there are text layers, it will also tell you the font used, the font color used, the font size used for those text layers. So if you're a designer who is working, trying to replicate, let's say, a design sent from your graphic artist, and you want to do your iOS or Android screen layout, but you don't want to use the images, but you want to replicate the sizing or the fonts and colors that they used, PNG Express does the job for you fairly well. Moving on to the next one. DevRocket. Now DevRocket is somewhat like PNG Express. Again, it's a PNG Photoshop plugin. It'll take PSD images, but it's kind of it's kind of PNG Express on steroids, because this can do a lot of things for instance. Now, of course, one issue with this one is that it's aimed mainly at iOS developers. Like the view template option lets you create a new template for iOS, for iPhone or iPad, and the template will it will do the PSD, a new PSD image, which is a template with the toolbar, the status bar, and everything laid out in place with the correct sizes, so that you can design your screens using that image. Then it can do icon templates. An icon template in DevRocket will create one image which will output all the different sizes you need for iPhone applications, because the iOS developers here probably know how many icon sizes you need for an iOS app. Like, you need to do at least 5 or 6 different icon sizes. This will do one image where you can do the big icon, and it will size it down for each resolution you require. Then there's the preview design, where you can, if you use the view template and created the template and you did your design, when you say preview design, it takes that design and puts it into an iPhone or iPad frame, so that you can see what your application looks like on the iPhone or iPad. And then, of course, export assets does what PNG Express does as well, which is to export all your layers as individual images. Now, of course, this is basically the view template feature, where if you set view template, it just outputs a screen like this, where you can design the UI that you want on the layout itself. One really useful feature that I found with DevRocket is the fact that it can extract one particular layer. Like, let's say you're doing your iOS application or your Android application, and your designer has sent you a button that you want extracted from your image. You just want that one button to display on your app. You can select that layer. There's a tiny icon at the top. I don't know whether you can see. It looks like a pair of scissors. It's called the snip tool. If you use the snip tool, it extracts just that layer and puts it onto a separate image file. You can save it, and then you can go on with that. So again, I find this very useful when dealing with images. And then we have Slicey, which again is this is not a PSD plugin. This is a standalone app, but again, Windows people are out of luck because there's OS X only. But this is probably the simplest of all the image manipulation tools I've been talking about. Because Slicey, basically, you can again set up a PSD file with layers and tag the layers with the file name you want it to save as, or the extension you want. This will also do retina plus non-retina images. You can for the layer name, you can tag it with plus at x at 2x, and it'll output the image as a retina image, or it'll output as non-retina. So the good thing about Slicey is, once you have created your PSD file, you just drag it onto the Slicey window and drop it, and Slicey will extract all the images and save them, and it keeps track of what it did. So if you go back and change something on the PSD, Slicey updates everything at its end. So it kind of works very nicely if you're on OS X. Then, we get to even more complicated images. Let's say you don't get a image from a designer, but you want to create your own images. Inkscape is a very good tool to use because it's cross-platform all the way, like Windows, Mac, Linux, everything. It's free, and you can do like beautiful images like this, like it looks photorealistic, and it's a brilliant tool. But what I'm getting to with this is like most developers can't really draw artwork, right? Like I can't. So when you get to that, like there's this, like this is not a tool, but there's a good site. This guy has tutorials using Inkscape, which shows you how to do, very cartoony looking but very nice game art in very simple steps. Like, this is all you need to do. Like, he basically tells you what tools you need to use in Inkscape and how you would go about doing a lion or a gun, or, he has a lot of tutorials on his site, which again, like if you're doing games and so on, this might prove very useful to you. Okay. Now, let's say we don't want to do 2D graphics, but we want to do 3D graphics. Then we come to DAZ 3D, which is Windows and OS X and a free tool. It basically lets you get characters, like objects which act as like you can get objects which show a gnome or a troll or a giant or just normal people. Like the site is a little too heavy on the female form for my taste. But they seem to be catering to mostly guys, but still they do have some really good tools and this is a good tool for developing 3D graphics if you want to do it. Only thing that you have to be aware of is the base tool, which is free, comes with a very limited set of objects. Like you will get maybe 2 people and 3 trees and that kind of thing. So if you want to do all these nice looking images, you have to buy content, and beware, like you might end up buying like 800 $1,000 worth of objects fairly quickly, because they do have a lot of stuff and their main business is selling the content rather than the tool. So you have to beware. But now moving on from there, one thing that DAZ is really bad at is doing backgrounds. Now there's another tool, View, which does beautiful backgrounds. Like this is done in View. Like View has been used in some really well-known movies, like Invincibles had View. Then quite a few of the Pixar movies have View in the background for doing trees and moving grass and things like that. It's again cross-platform. It's free for the base version, which again comes with very limited content and functionality. Then the price goes up, like they have multiple different tiers of versions, because basically what they do is most of the functionality is added in the form of plugins. Each plugin costs you like $90 or $100 and so on. Incidentally, all the pricing is in US dollars. So for the whole talk, all the pricing is in US dollars. So they just add on plugins. If you bought all the plugins, you probably end up paying about $800. But they have a version which contains all the plugins, which sells for about $600. But again, the whole thing is content is what really makes these applications shine. So you have to buy the content from elsewhere. So one thing you can do is you can do DAZ content and export it and bring it into View 3D. But beware again that sometimes exporting stuff and bringing it into the other application, you will find somebody's face goes dragging into the side, or they are missing their clothes and things like that. All these things happen. Now let's say you got now the next few tools are going to be more for game developers. But I'm sure somebody will find this useful. Let's say you got your graphics together. You started to do your game, and you need to create a sprite sheet. Does everybody know what a sprite sheet is, or do I need to? Basically, a sprite sheet is where because if you use individual images in a game, they take up too much memory, because each image has to be in the width and the height has to be in a power of 2. So because like let's not go into the theory, but basically that's how it has to be. So so because of that, using 10 small images might end up using a lot of memory, because each small image might need to be at a slightly higher power of 2, taking up more memory. So because of that, you have what's called sprite sheets, where you can put all the images together, and the whole image has to be a power of 2. But in the individual images within don't have to be. So because of that, you can pack more in and use less memory. So for that, there have been tools, over the years, like a few years ago, there was something called Zoptex, which used to be a flash tool, which was available online. So Zoptex then turned into not Zoptex, somebody else created Texture Packer, which actually does a lot more than Zoptex. And so this is the tool. This is Texture Packer, and Texture Packer will basically create a sprite sheet for you. That's about all it does. But it does have a lot of options, and it also supports a lot of gaming frameworks, because there is you will have Cocos 2D, you will have Corona, you will have Muai, and there's so many different frameworks out there for doing games. Texture Packer supports almost everything, and the guy is fairly responsive. And if you guys have the time, take a look at the website, because they have some really nice videos on image compression and how it works, and how sprite sheets help you and stuff. It's pretty funny and it's pretty interesting. Okay, so let's say now tile. Now let's say you have your sprite sheets, but when you're doing games, you can't really have huge images. Like for instance, for a background, if you have a huge image doing the background, it again takes up memory. So usually what game developers do is they use tiles. They create a set of smaller tiles which can be used to create the background. For instance, like here, the background is made up of this one single green tile, which is laid out over so many so much of the area, and that reduces memory. Now tile is probably the best tile editor out there, and it's again free. So a good resource to have if you're doing a lot of tile based games. Now, physics editor. Now the thing is, also in games, you have this whole concept of physics. You have physics engines which simulate. That soon? Yeah. Okay. By the way, if anybody, because as I said, if anybody has questions, just raise your hand, and I'll answer it as we go along. So so that way, because I'm not even through half the list of stuff. That's okay. Because this was that I created that speech to go on till as long as it needs to go. So yeah. So if you have questions, just raise your hand in the middle. I'll just answer those. Now physics engines basically simulate physics. So for instance, let's say an apple falls from a tree. When it falls down, depending on the surface, let's say you have a bouncy surface like a trampoline, the apple's got to bounce back. So that's simulated by physics engines in games. Now for physics, the thing is, each object has to, so that you can figure out how objects collide, the objects have to have a shape, it's called a physics shape. Now if let's say your apple was square, when two apples collide, the corners, since they are square, this part will, the apple will be like this. So if two apples collide on the corner, it will still look like the apples collided, even though on screen the apples aren't really hitting each other. So that's why physics shapes are important, and the physics editor lets you create a fairly realistic shape using the tool. Now, thank you.
I have a question about the physics.
Yeah.
In this case, making a collision detection unit for it.
Yeah, it's
What format is it exporting? How do I use that?
yeah, it'll export again for several different this is again by the same guy who did Texture Packer. It supports quite a lot of the game engines out there. So for Cocos 2D, it'll output as Cocos 2D code, where the object will be created in Cocos 2D code. So
It makes the code for you.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So basically, each one you design the shape, and then you tell it to output the code for the engine that you have in mind. So for Coco Studio, it will output Coco Studio code saying this, these points define the object. Like it will be Objective-C code. For for Corona, it will output as Lua code. So for each engine, it will output separate code. So now level, yeah.
How many engines?
Sorry.
What are the more common engines? See, like, there's a new engine that comes out, Cooper, plugin or something else.
If it's a new engine, it probably, because the guy, like basically the developer has to add support for the new engines. So like if the guy is fairly responsive, if you talk to him and tell him, hey, I want this engine, he'll probably add it because he's been very responsive. Like every time I've talked to him, he's he's fixed the issues. So, but of course, if there's a new engine out and he doesn't know about it, he probably will not add support for that. Like I'm real, like you're probably better off checking the website because there's a huge list. Like basically he supports most of the game engines that I'd heard about. So you're probably better off checking the website because he will have a complete list. Whereas I will tell you like these ones are supported, but I might not even remember half of those. Okay. So level helper is basically the previous tools all mixed together. Like it's a map editor, it's a physics engine, and it puts everything together so that you can design your game on screen. Like you can set up, like you can basically set up the tiles for the screen. You can set up the objects. You can set the physics for the game, and it even has a tester where you can, like for instance, like you can put a cat on at the top of the screen, and when the game starts, the cat will just fall. The tester will show you the cat falling down, and if there's a bouncy block below it, the cat will bounce, and all that will happen. Like you can basically test out your game without writing a lot of code at all. You can basically test a lot of physics logic, right in the tool itself. This again supports a lot of engines. Like it supports, almost. This guy is not the same guy as the other guy, but he also does. He's very responsive, and he's been developing this tool for like 2 years now, I believe. And he, like, if you talk to him, he'll probably add support for any new engines, but most of the ones which are there are supported. Now, this is again like, kind of like, this is kind of like level helper again, but this lets you do a lot of the coding in the game itself as well. Plus, this will output to most of the mobile platforms out there. Like it will output to iOS, it will output to Android. It does HTML as well, if I'm not mistaken, and I believe it does. I'm not sure whether it does Windows or not. And this one, like I don't know whether anybody remembers Android's App Inventor. Like they had this crazy tool sometime back. Google had this thing called App Inventor, where instead of writing code, you could just drag blocks around, and if logic would be blocks, and you connect the blocks together to write your code. This has a similar engine where all the logic is not done via code, but by putting blocks on screen and connecting the blocks up to create the logic. So for a variable, you'd drag a block on, and a if condition would be another block with a space in the middle for the variable, that kind of thing. So you can develop the game, the physics, and that kind of thing in the game, in the app itself. So Game Salad is again something similar to the previous ones, where you can develop games in the application itself with very minimal coding or no coding at all. Now, an interesting thing about Game Salad is that it comes with what it calls behaviors, pre-developed code, which can be dragged onto the screen, and it lets you do carry out a specific action. Okay, so basically that covers all the general tools. The next ones are iOS, but I think we are probably out of time, right? Okay, so yeah, sure. So then I'll run through the iOS apps quickly. Now Slender is a tool for checking your iOS projects to see what resources are used and what's not used. So it'll check to see, for instance, like we all have these projects where we create the project, we put some demo images or placeholder images in. 2 months down the line, we have 1,500 images, and we don't know whether any of them are used or not. Slender will go through your project. It'll check your zip files. It'll check your source code and check whether all the resources in your project folder, whether any of them are used and what's not used. So it'll highlight those images which are not used, and you can simply delete those or remove them from your project. Resource Helper, on the other hand, helps you with images in a different way. It checks all your images to see whether the images are valid images. It will check to see whether you have Retina images. So if you have a Retina image but you are missing the non-Retina image, it will show instead of all green, it will show red somewhere. It will show you that the non-Retina image is missing, and you can actually use the tool to generate the non-Retina version or the Retina version. Of course, the Retina versions are scaled up, so it's not quite nice, but the non-Retina versions work very well. This can also be used to create placeholder images. For instance, let's say you're doing an app and you need a button, but you can't talk to your designer at the moment because the designer's at lunch or he's in a different country or something. You can go into Resource Helper, tell it I want a image of this height and width. It will create a placeholder image, and it will do the non-Retina version or the Retina version as well, and you can just use those for the time being till you get the real images from your designer. Then there's Deploymate, which is brilliant at handling all the different iOS versions, because it checks all your code and tells you, if there's as the iOS developers know, you can say which version is which version your app is targeted for. So this will check your project and tell you whether all the API calls you made in your app fit the targeted version or not. If it doesn't, it tells you where the issues are so that you can go through and fix the issues. And Reveal app. This one lets you run through your application and check the view structure so that you can see how the views are layered in your app. So you can see where the views are, whether they are hidden. You can work with a view, for instance, let's say you have a button, but your button never appears in your app and you don't know why it doesn't appear. So if you use this, it will show you where the button is and what layers are before, what views or layers are before your button. So if your button doesn't appear, is it because something else is covering it, or is it because your button is hidden, or is it because your button is out of the screen? You can check all those, and you can also do real-time changes. While you're running the app, you can maybe change the color of a button or change the position of a button and see how it works. It's beta at the moment, so it's free, but once it goes live, I have no idea what the pricing will be. There's a similar app called Spark app, which does the same thing, but I forget what the pricing on that one is. I think that's about it. So, any questions? I have I've seen, I don't use it myself. I've seen ones like that where you can do there's one which does CSS, I believe. It'll take the PSD and it'll create CSS out of it so that you get the styles and stuff. But I really can't remember the name offhand. Anybody else? Okay, so thank you.